Hello, and welcome to the Point Loma Democratic Club podcast. This podcast is a fascinating and informative discussion with two of the most involved and connected individuals who understand the intersection of technology and society and how it will alter our lives in San Diego. This podcast is made possible by the generosity of our members. Consider becoming a member by signing up on our website, pointlomadem.org. Club President Susan Penado invited our two speakers to introduce each other at this month's meeting recorded on July the 24th, 2016.
We are very, very grateful to Barbara Bree and Mary Walshok for agreeing to do this presentation to educate us in a deeper way about where the money comes from for San Diego's economy.
Maybe I should introduce you first, and then you could introduce me.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Cool.
So Mary and I have known each other since the early 1980s. And I actually worked for Mary when I was at the Connect program at UCSD. Mary's one of the founders of Connect, which was started in the mid-80s to link high-tech and biotech entrepreneurs with the resources they needed for success. I mean, we'll talk more about why Connect got started and what it's done for the community in our Q&A, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Mary. But the first thing I'd like to start out by saying is Mary is an academic entrepreneur. I know that's an oxymoron to many of you who may have worked in universities. Well, what's really unique about Mary is that over the course of her career, she has developed many new programs at UCSD, Connect being just one of them. Her formal title is she is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Public Programs, and she's the Dean of Extension. She's written more than 100 articles and reports. She's written a number of books, including this one, which we'll probably reference a lot today, called Reinvention and Invention, the Evolution of San Diego's Innovation Economy. And her particular focus is how globalization and rapid changes in technology are affecting the social dynamics and economic challenges of regions across America. So that's Mary.
So when I met Barbara Bree, it was through a colleague of hers who is the not yet editor at the San Diego Union Tribune, Karin Winter. And she, I think, or you introduced me to Karin, right? It was
One day through Buzz.
Through Buzz Woolley, that's right, who helped us start Connect. Buzz Woolley actually owns a hotel over on Coronado, but was also one of the early investors in some of the more successful San Diego companies. And we became friends, and he got very interested in helping to grow the entrepreneurial high-tech economy here. And you're right. You introduced me to Karin, but he introduced me to you.
Buzz was a neighbor of mine.
But what's interesting about Barbara is how her career has evolved from newspaper reporter at the LA Times doing investigative reporting in the business and economic space, to helping start the Connect program, to founding a program called Athena, which is a program for women entrepreneurs, to becoming an actual entrepreneur herself. Wonderful company called Pro Flowers. I don't know if any of you have used them, or one of the early online floral delivery companies. And then with her husband, Blackbird Ventures, right, has been investing in a variety of companies. Barbara has always had a civic interest and has emerged in her later in life as someone who I believe can really make an enormous contribution to the city of San Diego because she understands business. She's done it. She's had some fail. She's had some succeed. She understands entrepreneurs and the innovation economy. And I'm delighted to have her as my friend.
Okay. So in the preface to your book, Mary, you write that our city is a paradox. We want to build a world-class city with only minimal investments, but we don't want to pay taxes. So, and we care a lot about the environment here. That's a long-term thing in San Diego. But we want to have our cake and eat it too. And you also note that our economy has been based on feeding from the federal trough, which is ironic given we don't like to pay taxes. The military has an enormous presence here. Federal research funding has been an enormous part of our economy. So what Mary and I would like to do today is talk about the history of our innovation economy, which of course is based a lot on feeding from the federal trough, and what it means to all of us, and what it's going to mean to our region going forward. So the first question, Mary, is we both share an interest in resilient, adaptive economies. How come San Diego is resilient and adaptive in a way that St. Louis is not?
Well, San Diego had an early history of total failure in trying to grow its regional economy. This book that Barbara referenced, that I wrote with an historian, documents how San Diegans could not attract businesses or investors. We're talking at the turn of the last century to this region. Part of it was the Pacific Ocean on one side, right? The desert and mountains on the other, and the Mexican border to the south, and the Valley of the Fleas, Las Pulgas, between us and Orange County. So San Diego's early history was primarily as a destination point for people who had various respiratory and other illnesses. As many cities, by the way, in the West were. Santa Barbara, Denver, Phoenix, often began, Palm Springs, where I grew up. Half the kids I graduated from high school with in 1960 had someone in their family with tuberculosis or asthma or some sort of respiratory disease. Now, this is not a trivial point, so I'm running on a bit. The second characteristic of San Diego is if you think about at the height of the Industrial Revolution, what was going on in cities like Detroit and Cleveland and Cincinnati and Chicago, literally sewage in the streets, horse and buggy, all kinds of diseases and uncleanliness, if you will. And so middle-class people who could afford to get out of the cities were leaving in droves, both for health and for lifestyle. And actually there was a rich literature at the turn of the last century that was very anti-industrial, that was very popular novels and books. So what you had in San Diego is a migration of basically middle class, which means reasonably well-educated and enlightened people, many of whom came with health issues, most of whom were escaping the Industrial Revolution. I don't want to live where there are factories. I don't want to live where there's manufacturing. And they come to this beautiful oasis, but then the question is, how do you build an economy in the height of the Industrial Revolution in a place like San Diego? And so the tipping point for San Diegans was the Spanish-American War, and as the United States acquired the Philippines and Guam and the Pacific front, suddenly there emerged an idea about where our future lay as an economy, and that was to be the home of the Pacific Fleet. And so for 25 years, and still today, citizens mobilized around attracting and securing the nice, clean industry, the United States Navy. And that is at the heart of our industrial growth. And as Barbara knows, I argue even our high-tech economy today, 120 years later. And so those peculiar circumstances, which are not trivial, had a lot to do with how our economy looks today. I don't know if that was too much,
no,
maybe.
That's great,
We don't want to take too much time,
right.
so.
So actually, I do have questions prepared for Mary, lots of them, but I think what I'd like to do is ask a few more. And please, I'd like to hear from you all as to what questions you have. So you started to talk, so after the Spanish-American War, it sort of became clear that the military was a clean industry for San Diego. So could you talk more about the military's impact on the region, particularly after the Cold War?
Well, and even before, because you mentioned our inattention to building infrastructure in San Diego. No one in this room, I'm probably I'm close to the oldest person in this room. I'm going to be 74 in September. But most of us do not remember this history. But I think it's very significant that with the buildup of World War II, if you just allow me 2 minutes, San Diego and the move of it was Ryan Airlines, you know, the aerospace industry and consolidation here in San Diego. San Diego became really pivotal to the war effort, particularly in terms of training troops, but also in terms of research and development in communications and in aerospace. We wanted to break those damn Germans' codes, right? And we had the tallest radio tower in America here in the 1920s, 30s on Cholas somewhere over here. Many of you know local history better than I. But what is important is that there were only 2 or 3 cities in America that FDR determined were federal cities. And San Diego was one of them. Now, what did it mean to be a federal city as we were building up for the war? It meant that the federal government built roads, put in sewage lines, subdivided and built housing, created a lot of the infrastructure that the personnel who were working on behalf of the war effort needed. So a lot of the early development of the infrastructure we enjoy today around the harbor and downtown came during that period. We never had to tax ourselves. We never had to make the same kinds of investments. At the height of the war, Barbara, it was over 60% of our GDP was military and defense based. And as the war wound down, there was a crisis in San Diego, and the city council, God bless them, were smart enough to recognize that, oh my goodness, as the war ends, less defense contracting, we won't need as many troops. Where does our future lie? 2 men were critical to helping the city council determine where the future of this region lay. Why I think city council members are so important. Okay. And land use decisions. Roger Revelle, who some of you may know or know of, who was running the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which you may not know, was the Division of War Research during the war for the University of California, as was Lawrence Livermore Lab in the North. And we put in our book a quote from the president of the university who said, there is no more purpose to which no more higher purpose to which the University of California can be committed than saving the world for democracy. And the spirit of that time was that every institution had a role to play, and San Diego was vital. But with the turndown, Roger Revelle, who was very well connected in Washington, and John J. Hopkins, who had built General Dynamics through consolidation of a number of aircraft companies, and was about to start General Atomics, a private kind of think tank up on the Mesa, The two of them actually went to the city council and said, you know what's going to happen after this war is over. There's going to be a significant increase in federal funding for science and technology research. Remember the Manhattan Project? And all the investment that had been put into the growth of science and technology in the war effort, it was determined by the Congress that we needed to continue that investment in order to assure the national security of the country. And so in the 50s, the city council zoned the Pueblo lands on the Torrey Pines Mesa for light industry and R&D, so that General Atomics, Jonas Salk, a University of California, all of these research-focused institutions would locate there and keep this regional economy alive. And those land use decisions, like the decisions to give Pueblo lands to the military at the earlier in the 20th century and at the turn of the century, were all decisions that were made by the city council and supported by a vote of the public at 2/3. It's an incredible story. And I've been interviewed all over the United States about what is it about San Diegans that they keep voting. I don't think they would today. But back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they voted to dedicate these public lands to high-end research.
So the city owned the land?
The city owned the land because we'd taken it away from the Mexican rancheros. Remember when we settled and became a state, and the state of California then re-granted these lands, called Pueblo lands, to the city of San Diego. And we chose to use those in the ways I'm describing to you. But then, I'm sorry to go on, I'm not as much of an academic as I'm sounding like today. The last piece, which relates to Barbara's story and why I think leads into a conversation for all of us, the upshot of this was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, San Diego continued to benefit from federal investments, but they were of a different character, right? And it was more and more in the research and development arena. The company Irwin Jacobs started before Qualcomm was a defense contracting company. It was Linkabit, and it was working on communications technology. Cubic, Titan Industries, SAIC, big employers from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We're still getting federal contracts and federal grants. And even today, as Barbara indicated, close to 50% of our GDP in this region is from the federal government. About 25% for the military installations and defense contracting. Another 25%, the world that I'm in, R&D, up on the Torrey Pines Mesa. UCSD did over $1 billion in research last year. If you combine all the institutions on the Mesa, it's about $3 billion. We create tens of thousands of jobs, not just for chemists and biologists, but for custodians and groundskeepers and food service folks and secretaries and accounting and bookkeeping. So those jobs are enabled because of our successful relationship at the federal level. And I think that as we think about our future, Barbara, and how the city council is going to affect our future, your sort of sophistication about this reality. It ain't tourism, folks. It's a big piece, but what creates the high-wage jobs are the military and the research and development.
Yeah, and that's really it's important what Mary said about the high-wage jobs. And EDC released a study last summer that said the average salary in a high-tech and biotech company is over $100,000 a year. So this is really propelling the entire San Diego economy. Oh, this is really propelling the entire San Diego economy. Of course, these companies spend money in the economy. They rent buildings, they buy office supplies, Their employees buy houses, either restaurants, buy cars. And so without the innovation economy, San Diego would really be nothing. And one of the reasons I actually stepped forward to run for city council is there's never been anybody with my background on the city council. And I figured if we want to have a city for our children and our grandchildren, we really need these worlds to survive and thrive. And we also need to make sure that the opportunities in this sector are available to children all over San Diego, not just north of interstate 8. But now we'll move on to, so we're sort of after World War II, we're still getting all this federal money. UCSD comes about in the mid-60s, the Salk Institute comes a few years before that. UCSD from the beginning is set up to be a research university. You know, who knew back then it would be such a world-class research university? But, you know, honestly, there's very few companies at that point. Very little of the technology is being commercialized. San Diego still is really dependent on the military. I know before I arrived here part-time in '77 and lived here full-time since '81, but I know in the late '60s there was a cutback in defense spending, and apparently, how many of you were here in 1967? So I don't know if you remember, there was a big cutback. I've been told there was a big cutback in defense spending. Lots of people lost their jobs. I mean, houses were for sale at fire sale prices. This again happened in the 80s, and I think that was one of the motivations to start Connect.
Well, in the 60s, Time magazine referred to San Diego as America's bust city, because we had such high unemployment. And we managed to come back in part because of the growth of these institutions on the Torrey Pines Mesa and the Cold War. But in the 80s, with the end of the Cold War, there was yet another crisis. And again, all of us in this room probably remember that within 18 months, 60,000 jobs, just in general dynamics, disappeared. Good jobs, engineering jobs, manufacturing jobs, technical jobs. And that had an incredible effect on housing and construction. And so I think by the late 80s, our unemployment was at over 10%, which is pretty high. So what Barbara is referring to is, again, for me, a lesson in civic leadership, and we tried to write about this in our book, because the Economic Development Corporation downtown, which at that time was funded by the city council and led by a man by the name of Dan Pay, realized after doing research on what was happening nationally that San Diego's future wasn't based on attracting new big companies here, but that we needed to grow our own companies out of all the R&D that was going on the Torrey Pines Mesa. And so a delegation came up to UCSD. I was invited, I was very young then, into a meeting with my boss, who was at the time Dick Atkinson, chancellor of the university, went on to be president. And he'd come from NSF. And they said, the university has to start working with the city to grow more technology-based entrepreneurial companies. And out of a series of conversations, a whole new network of people. We got folks from downtown who were involved with the chamber and EDC, interacting with folks on the Mesa. Nobody knew who Irwin Jacobs was. I think most of you know Irwin today, but we did an event to introduce Irwin. A couple hundred people showed up. They were just curious, who is this guy? Because they, you know, he just sold Linkabit. He hadn't started Qualcomm yet. Nobody knew who David Hale or Ivor Royston or Ted Green, who'd started this biomedical company called Hybritech, and Lilly swooped in and bought it for $500 million. You gotta be kidding. There are companies like that in San Diego? And so what happened was a network was created, which Barbara refers to as, we called it Connect. And it brought all these different interests together to focus on how are we going to grow an entrepreneurial tech-based economy. Well, I don't know how much you read the business page, but if you look at San Diego today, we're number 1, 2, or 3 in a multitude of arenas. In the life sciences, I think the Bay Area is usually number 1, and depending on what month you measure, Boston or San Diego are number 2. In wireless technology, who would have imagined that what Irwin Jacobs and Andy Viterbi and Harvey White were doing for the Navy would become Qualcomm and the cell phone revolution? The Viterbi algorithm, and Andy lives here, that he developed for Qualcomm is in, 8 billion phones. I mean, it's an insane number. All over China, Korea, it is at the heart. It's like Intel inside cell phones. And so the growth of these industries was significantly aided by these folks in the 80s and 90s doing exactly what the people in 1910 and 1920 and 1930 did to get the military here. They flew to Washington, they put on venture capital forums and got on the phone and asked their Stanford alumni friends, get your down here, we've got good companies, you should be investing in San Diego. And it's been an extraordinary ride over the last 25 years. And San Diego, not just nationally, but internationally, is considered an extraordinary example of how a community can reinvent itself, which is why I called my book for Stanford, Invention and Reinvention, because we're good at reinventing ourselves. And we may be at a point in time where we need to reinvent yet again, Barbara.
So I'd like to just do a little bit of why I think San Diego has been a great place for startups. And then of course there's challenges ahead. And I'd like to hear what your questions are for Mary and me. So I've been in the innovation economy for 30 years, starting with working at Connect for 10 years and then leaving to become an entrepreneur myself. And so I've been here a long time, and I think there are some ingredients to what I call our secret sauce. And first, we have a dynamic history of entrepreneurship, starting with the aerospace entrepreneurs. I mean, the Spirit of St. Louis was built in San Diego by Ryan Airlines. We have knowledgeable service providers. We didn't have them at the beginning of Connect, and that was one of the reasons Connect was started. But we have attorneys, accountants, bankers who understand what it is to deal with a startup. Third, our companies have access to terrific talent, to people who come from all over the world. The intellectual capital here is amazing. And much of this intellectual capital comes out of our research institutes and our universities. We also have a culture of risk takers, which isn't true in many places in the world. And when you're an entrepreneur, not everything works out. And in some cultures, if something doesn't work out, it's like having a brand on your forehead and you have to leave town. Nobody will talk to you again. But in San Diego, that's not so. If something you're working on doesn't work out here, you're out at an event and everybody just walks up to you and says, well, what are you going to do next? What did you learn from the failure? And that's a great thing about San Diego. We also do have a growing angel investor and venture community. It's actually an area where we need more work, but it's still far better than it was many years ago. And our companies also do attract capital from all over the world. In fact, the bulk of the capital in the high-tech and biotech space comes from outside of San Diego. So our brand in the world is very important in making us an attractive place for investors. And while we may think of San Diego as expensive, and certainly our housing is expensive, we're still less expensive in terms of housing and office space than some of the regions we compete with, particularly the Bay Area and Boston.
And Los Angeles.
And Los Angeles. So So we're still, you know, I think we need to deal with the affordable housing issues, but at least in office space, lab space, we are cheaper than some of our major competitors. And I'll just say the last thing I'll say is, one thing I love about San Diego is after entrepreneurs have a successful exit, they stay involved. They start another company. They invest in companies. They go on nonprofit boards. They become a philanthropist. And I think this is wonderful. They don't just go off to Tahiti and, you know, sit on a beach. They stay involved. And this is really core to developing the next generation of entrepreneurs. Do you have any comments about?
I'm hoping we can have a conversation. It's a bit academic, but I think that the general public still is trying to understand how this tech community works. And the only other thing that I would add is my dad was an entrepreneur. He had a successful business in Palm Springs when I was growing up. And the image of a successful entrepreneur in the old days was a Saul Price, right? Or a Sam Walton. Somebody who started a single store or built a single product, and it was so exciting and so viable, they went regional. And then it proved to be so viable and so exciting regionally, they went national. And eventually went global. The thing about technology is it's global from day one. So we have tiny little companies up on the Torrey Pines Mesa that are, and downtown, some of these software companies that are developing, who have clients in Hong Kong and Stockholm and Rio de Janeiro, and they're only a $5 or $6 million company with, you know, 100 employees. That's not the world I grew up in as a young woman, but that is the world my grandchildren and future generations are growing up in. And so that requires a kind of different way of thinking about what's good for the local economy. And that's why I continue to be optimistic about San Diego, because one of the things many of you are associated with downtown, and recently I gave a talk and said, downtown San Diego is innovation's next frontier. Because what is happening today is software's in everything, right? It's in healthcare, it's in your traffic lights, it's in how we design clothes, it's in how we order food for our restaurants, or supplies for our restrooms if you're a big institution. It's everywhere, and the kinds of people who are developing these software companies are young, edgy millennials who like to live downtown. So we discovered close to 120 companies, most of them software companies that are global in this way I'm describing to you. And I think the future is extremely bright, but we have to continue to have affordable spaces for companies to incubate, affordable entry-level housing for these talented young people. So from my point of view, Barbara, who the city council is and what they focus on in the next 2 to 4 years could make or break San Diego's continued growth as an innovation economy. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. So, Anne-Marie, did you have a question?
Well, I heard that there was a company from Silicon Valley who decided to move to San Diego.
Yes.
Because they felt that there was so much into
They're
San
actually in La
Diego.
Jolla.
And I
They're
don't
actually
remember the
in
name of the
Lancaster.
company. That's
Yes,
very
it's BizApps.
BizApps.
Yeah.
I was just up in San Francisco for 4 days, and you know, we complain about our traffic, we complain about our costs, but relative to the other urban centers in California, so I always argue you can still have the California dream in San Diego. You can come here and completely create something from nothing and still find a place to live and a place to have an office and talented people. but we have to cultivate it and protect it.
Yes, Karina.
And I don't want to be picky about this. But
Yes,
the
please.
median home price in San Diego is $535,000, I think, and it's been up over 11% over the last year. We're not trending the right way.
No, we're not trending the right way.
So as much as we want an economy that's thriving, we're not balancing.
Right.
Yeah. So, I did sort of why I think San Diego is a good place for your startup to end up. Housing is one of the challenges. I mean, I have some other challenges, the K-12 education system, which isn't preparing our children, particularly children south of 8, for careers in the STEM economy, low college completion rates, the need for even more capital for our companies than they can get, the risk of, we've already seen some reductions in federal research funding. If military funding goes down, that impacts us. And I would also say a flawed immigration policy impacts us.
But there is a way, in my opinion, to have affordable housing and office space that for most of us in the room may not sound viable, but to anybody under 30 sounds really cool. I don't know how much time any of you spend in Barrio Logan, in the Diamond District, in Golden Hill, but those are wonderful neighborhoods contiguous to downtown. You literally can ride a bicycle, which lots of young people like to do. And there are swaths of land that have the potential to be developed for, and also to get in some cases, public assistance, so that they can be more affordable. The district elections, sorry, Barbara, has led, in my opinion, to council persons being primarily advocates for their own districts, when actually what would benefit the innovation economy, which is important to your district, would be investments in Southeast San Diego and Barrio Logan for housing and office space that new incubating companies. If you look at Santa Monica, St. Louis, which is trying to come back, it's in the cities, sort of the old decaying cities that are revitalizing. So that's why I think we still have a chance here, because we still have developable land and contiguous neighborhoods in the urban core that with enlightened civic and political leadership could make a huge difference.
Thank you. Yes.
Would our city benefit more by building a football stadium or by using that land for these types of startups?
Well, my position from day one has been no public money for the Chargers, and I don't want a stadium downtown because it is the next place for the innovation economy to expand.
I mean, I think the issue is what industries create good jobs, right? High wage jobs year round, and enterprises that have growth potential. A football stadium is how many games a year, and it's not going to grow. But these companies that are incubating downtown could add 200-300 engineers. And for every engineer you bring into the economy, you create 2 other jobs. And so from just a purely economic point of view, there's no arguing about it. That said, Pittsburgh, which is a very exciting city right now, as is Seattle, have downtown stadiums and downtown innovation corridors. But we're not talking about both and how to balance. We're promoting just
their
the one.
stadiums are already there.
And their stadiums were
Built
there
years ago.
Yes.
Hey, so now that we have legally enforceable climate action plan, how do you see that impacting, and like green tech and all that?
Well, I think the climate action plan gives us the incentives. We want to have more people live close to where they work. We want to have more people live in transit corridors. The next logical place for the innovation economy to expand is downtown and south of downtown, where we have, a trolley and other good transit. So I think it will only, help us, get to where we want to be with our climate action plan and create good jobs at the same time.
And the connection between the downtown trolley and UCSD, It's going to transform this place.
So most of you know that the Mid-Coast Trolley is supposed to start construction next, I think either at the end of this year or early next year, and you'll be able to literally go from the border to UCSD very easily.
Which means, you know, students could live downtown and faculty could live downtown if they so chose.
Students could live in Chula Vista, if their families
Yeah.
are there, commute to UCSD easily. Oh, so, and then Deborah, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, Brookings has just come out with a study on immigrants in large cities in the U.S. And San Diego has highest level of immigrants in the state of California. It's an interesting immigrant community in the sense it's not what a lot of people traditionally think about. You have people from the Middle East, people from the border, but these are very well educated people, but they have a barrier, and there's a language barrier. And what is the city doing in using that potential there? These are very, very bright and well educated, but they don't have the right language.
I don't know what the city's doing. I know, so these people come here either to go to school.
No, they're here because they're essentially from the Middle East.
So they're engineers at Walshok.
Right,
Yes.
right.
You know, that's a really good question. I don't know that we're doing a good job of integrating them into the community. What's interesting, you know, in my campaign for city council, we've had a lot of high school students volunteer. Becca knows this. And a lot of our volunteer high school students have been Asian, and mostly women. Right? And many of them, their parents are not U.S. citizens. Mostly their fathers are engineers at companies like Qualcomm or scientists at a biotech company. And they're like not, I can tell that, you know, what's interesting is the last weekend of the campaign, many of them actually came in and volunteered in the office just to see what this American election thing is like that they've been hearing about from their son or daughter. And I think we've done a bad job as a city of integrating them in. They go to work, they come home, and they're probably not integrated. And you brought up a great point. We should do a better job.
I don't speak English.
But a lot of
They
the,
actually do read English.
yeah, a lot of the universities, yeah, and
But
including,
they don't speak, they're not comfortable.
right, but there are lots of options to learn English as a second language through the community colleges and even through UCSD Extension. What I think is so fascinating about the pattern of immigration in San Diego, and you're right, it's extraordinarily diverse, is to follow what's happening with the first generation of immigrant kids, so that you're seeing sort of superstar students. And if you look at the admission to UCSD, 51% of the freshman class was Asian, 38% was first generation American, and these kids are qualified and they're doing very, very well. So I consider it a net gain. It's not just that the parents come and help build the economy we have today, but the children of the parents who grow up with a valuing education end up being the talent pool we're going to tap into for tomorrow.
So I'd first like to do a shout out to Becca Taylor. Becca ran our high school political fellowship program. Through the children that the parents are going to become integrated. I mean, Lark Wang, who actually we promoted to deputy field organizer, is going off to Stanford in the fall. And unfortunately, she's going to college, but we have many more of her classmates who are not yet graduating. Deborah, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. Well, first thing I wanted to go back to the city's history and point out that in as early as 42, the city already started losing a lot of its military programs.
That's right.
Consolidated aircraft
Yeah.
moved to Fort Worth, and that's where they started their advanced design department. And anyway, even though that's not owned by the government, it's certainly owned by, I just wonder if we just can't, we're unwilling to let go of the idea of how important, I mean, that we make the military presence is more important than it really is. Because I don't see, you know, will we have Miramar, tons of land there. This relates to the price of land, the availability of.
Oh, so I
Less
think your
expensive
question is
housing.
interesting. So we might be better off if Miramar, if the Navy said, here's San Diego, you
We
can
gave
have the
it to
land.
them. We
We might
gave
be
it to
better
them
off.
to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gave all this land.
Yeah.
And we've got this weenie, sorry, it's a small town airport, which is also very dangerous.
Yeah.
It's hard to get direct flights into there. American, like I'm from Fort Worth, that's why I knew about it, consolidated aircraft.
Yeah.
Because my father originally came out here, thought he died and gone to heaven, moving from Michigan, and then the bombing, I thought, well, they're gonna get us too. So they moved him way inland. But
I'll let Mary answer it. I think there may be a long run that San Diego has to figure out a way to live without the military because we can't count on it.
Well, but there's much to suggest that national security, I mean, we may not be the police of the world 20 years from now, but there still are national security issues.
oh, I'm not saying that at all.
And there is a tendency, and economic theory suggests something called path dependency, and so you tend to leverage the industries that you've been strong in previous epochs. And what's interesting about the military, Deborah, is how technology focused it's become. So we may have our cake and eat it too, because it's going to be, if you were predicting, and I'm not the best predictor, but the scenario that many people discuss is fewer and fewer service people, right? But
I don't
more,
mean that.
more and more advanced technology.
Yeah, I don't even mean that it would mean less personnel.
Yeah.
They have way more acreage than they need.
She means the land.
Oh, so you're saying they have excess
Yes.
acreage? Well, that's a very interesting question.
You've asked a really good point.
Yeah, I don't know how to respond, but it would be very good, it seems to me, to do an analysis of how productive the land use the military owns is. That could be,
And it's land again, that the city
Yeah.
gave to them, and we've had opportunities to get back. Like since I moved here in the 80s, we had a chance to get Miramar back.
yeah.
It's like, oh no, the military's so important.
I think we're gonna, I
I'm
have to
sorry.
look at this side of the room. Jose, I don't know, Susan wants us to end at 5, so.
Yeah, we
You
got
know what, this is, you know, if you want to go over 5 or 10 minutes. this is
Okay,
good.
just because I want to be respectful. So Jose and then the gentleman in the back who I can't see.
So my question's for Mary. If you could, I guess looking at the history of San Diego, the current trends, if you could do like a projection 5-10 years into the future, and then as a follow-up, besides electing Barbara, is there anything that common people can do in order to, I guess, help the innovation economy?
Well, I think land use is a huge issue. I really do. And we still have a chance to think about zoning and an integrated economic development strategy for the urban core. But I honestly think from a housing and also office space and business incubation space, co-working space, shared space, which is so important for these new economy companies. And that's, I think, something the city council could do and we as citizens would support. I have to echo Barbara's concern about the K-12 system. I'm going to maybe sound a little cynical. I don't think expecting the public schools to do it is enough. And so I know that there are programs that various libraries, universities, museums are developing to give kids access year-round to science and math and other kinds of opportunities. And that's the kind of thing I think we as citizens can support. I think we have to support our public schools. But given the demography of California, there's a whole generation of kids that are coming into the schools without the benefits a lot of middle-class Californians had going to summer camps and other things. So I think that's something we can do as citizens. But also, I think it's important to put, to get more engaged in sort of the branding of the city. I read an op-ed, it was online, but all of the promotion of San Diego, who gets the money? It's the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And I sent a note to some friends, because what does a Convention and Visitors Bureau want to brand the city for? They want to get people in beds, you know, and we want to populate a city. And so it seems to me that as a city, we need to find a way to engage many more people and organizations and neighborhoods in defining what is our brand. Or is that just something a Convention and Visitors Bureau? So those are three off the top of my head.
Sorry, yes, you.
I just have a couple of things about the military. You know, until we find some way to move the fleet to Oklahoma City. As long as we have that Pacific Ocean out there, sorry, that's where the fleet's going to have to be. We're going to have to be here on the coast. And also, there was a time when Miramar was offered to the city for $1, but it was considered too far out from the boonies at that time. And since that time, a lot has developed around between I-8 and Miramar.
Actually, at the time that the city could have taken over, when Top Gun moved out, and the city could have moved the San Diego airport there, the actual population center of San Diego County was right there. Because of the growth up toward Escondido and elsewhere. The center of the county was there, population.
But the people there didn't want the airport there. That's something to know. Susan.
All right, so you mentioned that the educational opportunities to make a more enriched education for our children would be a good place to start would be the museums. In Balboa Park. Well, I'm on the board of one of those museums, and I know that those museums do not have money. They are starving for support. And so where would the funding come from for these programs, since we don't like to pay taxes?
Well, I mean, at the heart of our society is the sort of public-private partnership model. So I don't think it's only government, and I don't think it's only philanthropy. And I think we need some business models, right, that enable institutions, not just museums, but multiple institutions to be enriching what the public schools are supposedly doing through their more formal academic programs. But I think it's going to require philanthropy as well as government.
So I want to go to people who haven't yet. You haven't had a question, and then Ann Hoiberg. So
you started out with pointing out something very clear and obvious to all of us, and Susan brought up again. I've tried to start businesses, and most people don't want to pay taxes and don't want to be involved with governmental bodies. So they want a lot, but they don't want to put into the red hen, you know, grow the corn, mill the corn, make the bread cornbread. They don't want to put the process in. Is there a strategy to educate these, well, all people, but Americans don't want to put into their own lives? How do you get them to put into their own lives?
I think you've asked a really good question, and so I'm a first-time candidate for public office as a grandmother. And one of the things, you know, hopefully I want to get elected in November, and then I really want to sort of have a conversation with the community. And we have technology in all kinds of ways we now can communicate with large numbers of people about what kind of city do you want there to be for your children and your grandchildren. And I think that's the conversation we have to have for people to be willing to invest in the future. And we've never had that conversation in a meaningful way in my history in San Diego. And also, you remember in the last 10 to 15 years, we had a pension fund crisis, where the city was honestly lying to the citizens of San Diego about the pension plan. I was the first editor of Voice of San Diego at the time, so I remember it well. And then we had a recession, which further hurt our economy. So I think we're at a good point. Our economy is good now. We're starting to invest in our infrastructure, and I'm, as I said, I'm not a career politician. I'm willing to be out there and take risks. I don't care if I ever have another public office. It's not why I'm doing it. So hopefully there are other people who will join me. And I'd like to go to Ann Hoiberg, who's been patient.
I do want to applaud you for running for office. I just am thrilled. But I wanted to make a shout out for our theater and opera segment of our community. And I know our city invests like maybe $6 million in our theater and opera sector. And we bring in over $1 billion. Maybe we should brand our city as not a sports community, but really arts, culture, theater, opera. Maybe that's where our real soul is. I don't know. But I wonder how we can promote more of that. We certainly have so many.
Yeah, I agree with Mary that San Diego needs a new brand, and that's one of the things I've talked about in some forums. Is we're not, I mean, America's finest city is like, so what? And when you're in another country and you say you're from San Diego, they say, oh, your beach is beautiful and you have a great zoo. Well, I'd like them to think, we have Illumina, the smartest company in the world. We have Qualcomm, whose chips are in every cell phone in the world. I'd rather people think about, what we're creating for the world. We have human longevity, a company that just raised $220 million in venture capital that's really on the cusp of, personalized medicine to a degree we can't even imagine. So, okay, one more. Susan, you'll tell us when to stop.
Yeah. There was a gentleman here.
Yes.
Well, I had an observation about the military question. Yes, we have Camp Elliott out there. We have Miramar. Miramar's probably not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Realistically, Camp Elliott is a big space, but I'm looking down the road. There are no training facilities on the West Coast other than the small ones around the Bay here. Potentially, that does offer a large landscape for the military to move into a school of some sort of thing. Sovereignty in the future. With the changes going on in the Pacific with China, I think that San Diego becomes more and more important in the next decade, 2 decades, maybe 3 decades out, confronting that situation. With regards to the schooling and so forth in the city, it seems like we have so many conflicting demands. A private entity wants to do something in Balboa Park. The public institutions in Balboa Park want to do something which they can't afford. How do you get these people to talk to each other so that they can maybe meet each other's goals and meet in the middle somewhere and be a beneficial participant for both parties?
Well, there are some examples of cities that have done it, if we could learn from them. And again, I'm not going to go into a lecture, I promise, but believe it or not, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Portland, Oregon, completely refocused. They went about a process of conversations, and they got folks to vote for renovation of riverfronts and all kinds of civic investments to help change the direction of their regional economy. And I think what is missing in San Diego, maybe it's because we live in this cul-de-sac that Neil Morgan always talks about, at the end of California, but there's so many interesting examples in other places in the world from whom we could borrow ideas or adapt ideas. And we tend not to pay attention to what cities like Wichita or Chattanooga or what was the other one I just mentioned? Yeah, and also Pittsburgh, Portland. And if Barbara, as a part of this process, we could get the newspapers or somebody to inform us, right, to tell us how some cities have been able to pull together. And it's always a mix of private and public, it really is. But we might actually make some changes.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on, that we could make some changes. There will be a great San Diego here when we're not here, our grandchildren. And you all asked amazing questions. This was quite a group.
Thank you very much.
You pushed us to our limits, so thank you, Susan, for inviting us.
Oh, this is wonderful. I'm everyone a big hand. We really.
If you enjoyed this podcast, consider becoming a member. More details are available at our website, pointlomadem.org. Meetings are held regularly at the Point Loma Assembly on Talbot Street. The Point Loma Democratic Club is one of several clubs of the San Diego County Democratic Party. More details are available from sddemocrats.org.